Good morning and welcome, and thank you all for joining us for the second event of our Sustainable Business Series. This webinar will be looking at lowering your carbon footprint. The Sustainable Business Series events and content are made free for anyone to access and attend, thanks to our sponsors, Aston University, the University of Birmingham and Shakespeare-Martineau. Our activities as a society are one of the main causes of greenhouse gas emissions, the consequences of which we are now seeing across the world in rising temperatures, rising sea levels and damage to ecosystems and biodiversity. We play a vitally important role in protecting our planet, and this webinar will look to provide insight into what businesses can do to reduce their carbon footprint. We're delighted to have with us today three excellent speakers, all of whom will be sharing their insights to help with your journey in becoming a greener and more environmentally sustainable organisation. First, we have Dan Saxton, who is the sustainability lead at Birmingham Women and Children's NHS Foundation Trust. Dan will be providing us with an insight into the NHS's activities in this space. We'll also have with us today Laura Boucher. Laura is Business Development and Customer Success Manager at Accredited, an organisation looking to use AI to power the world towards net zero. And then finally, we have Kirstin Roberts, who is Director at Freeths. Kirstin's an experienced commercial lawyer who's worked with businesses in the waste and renewable sector for over 17 years. We will begin with Dan in a moment, but just to go through the agenda for today, following the welcome, we'll have Dan, who'll be speaking about, like I say, the role of the NHS in achieving net zero and the Green Plan. Laura will be talking about what Accredited should be doing in this space. And then Kirstin Roberts will be speaking about waste reduction and greenwashing. At the end, we'll have a Q&A, so please do put your questions in the chat or the Q&A function as we go along, and we'll ask those questions of our speakers at the end during the Q&A session. And then we'll begin, then we'll end on 10 o'clock. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Dan.
Thanks, Emily. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully something has popped up. Is that?
That looks good, thank you.
Good, thank you. Well, good morning. I'm Dan Saxton. I'm the Sustainability Lead for Birmingham Women's and Children's NHS Trust, and I'm going to give a little bit of an insight into what we've been doing for our net zero carbon journey. Just a little bit about us. So here's Birmingham. This is our children's hospital. We have a women's hospital, and then we have a mental health unit. And a sprinkling of other small domestic sort of size buildings, but there are three main sites. We see about 640,000 patients every year, and we have around 6,000 staff that support those. I'm going to talk you through a little bit about the link between climate and health. Obviously, that's our industry, so that's what means most to us. What the whole of the NHS has set its stall out to do around climate change, what we're doing with our Green Plan, focusing a little bit on heat and decarbonising heat, and then a final thought. So, of course, you know, we're in the health industry, so I know this won't necessarily apply to everybody, but apart from that IPCC document you can see in the top left there, there's lots of documents that we can refer to within the UK and in the global library, so to speak, that talk about the link between climate change and health. And you'll see there in the big blue box, the World Health Organization said that it's one of the greatest threats to public health. Well, obviously, that's very important to us because we are in the health industry and we're caring for people. And of course, while we might think that that is maybe a third world issue, it's not. It's an issue for us here in the UK, and it's really about death and disease, what climate change brings around death and disease. And we're seeing that even in the last few years, that we're seeing an increased rate of death and disease around heat. People can't cope with the heat, around respiratory disease specifically, and of course things like skin cancer from UV exposure. And that was, you'll see at the bottom there, but that was back in 2015 that people started talking about those sort of things, and we've moved on quite a way since then. Even as a single organisation, it's something that's important to us, and to try and hit it home with our staff, our carbon emissions from 21 to 22, we estimated will cause 14 deaths sometime in the next century, which is quite alarming. Not something you want to hear that your organisation is doing, but that's the reality. So what's NHS England doing about that? Well, in 2020, Sir Simon Stevens, the CEO for the NHS at the time, said that the NHS will be the world's first carbon net zero national health system. And they produced this document, Delivering a Net Zero NHS, which is not a bad document. It talks in a lot of detail about how we might get to that point and the journey we need to take. They very kindly put together this graphic, which kind of breaks down those scopes 1, 2, and 3, and set some targets for us. And one of the first things we do when we talk to our internal teams, all of our staff about this, is we talk about carbon, because you'll hear us talk about carbon. It's one of those phrases that people throw around, and we just want to make it clear, and I'm sure most of you understand this already, we're actually talking about carbon equivalent. So there's a little E on the end, and it's all of those greenhouse gases at the top. And we're not just talking about carbon, we're talking about all of them, and we use carbon as the word to describe all of them. And N2O at the top there, nitrous oxide, as an example, is an anesthetic gas. We use it in our maternity wards, for example, and is 300 times worse than carbon dioxide. Still, we use carbon as the catch-all for that. Now, very unhelpfully, the NHS decided to split scopes 1 and 2 and 3 into 2 targets. And the first target we have is what we call footprint, and it's scope 1, scope 2, and a little bit of scope 3, but it's the stuff that I guess the day-to-day stuff that happens around your buildings. There's a couple that are thrown in there that are very specific to us, like meter-dosed inhalers and that kind, and anesthetic gases, but the rest are things that most businesses will find. That's the utilities you use, the waste that you produce, the water you use, that kind of stuff. Our target for that is 2040, to be net zero carbon at 2040, but 80% of that we have to achieve between 2028 and 2032, which actually isn't very far away at all. We produce this carbon pie, as we call it, and this is a breakdown of all of our the carbon that makes up our annual emissions. Some of this information is very clear and the data is very good. Some areas it isn't. I'll talk about that as we plod through these slides, but that first target, we're really talking about this green section here, which is the building energy use, your electricity, your gas, water waste, and some that are unique to us, that 4%, which is sort of health related. On the other side of that graphic, we have our second target, our footprint plus, and you can see the icons that are, I'm hoping that's big enough for you to see the icons on there, but effectively that is travel that's not business travel. So that's how people get to our facilities, whether that's our staff or our visitors, our patients. We don't have very good data on that. We're trying to improve by carrying out some surveys. It's not particularly a great way of collecting data. So currently we're using national statistics to help us pin those numbers down. And the rest of that, our 62%, in fact, are things that we buy. It's just stuff in our supply chain. Anything from a pen to an MRI scanner or a building that we build is the lion's share of where our carbon sits. That target is 5 years later, it's 2045, but again, 80% of that we have to have achieved between 2036 and 2039, even before our first target's met. And quite often we get people saying, well, just plant trees. Well, actually offsetting is not the answer. It's some of the answer, but you have to have done everything else first, we believe. And actually for our annual emissions, we need a mature forest larger than the whole of Birmingham, just for our organisation's annual emissions. So what are we doing about it? Well, we have a green plan. We're using this graphic, this carbon pie, as the basis of our green plan. We're actually mandated to have a green plan by NHS England. Not only do we have to have a green plan, but it has to be board approved. Ours was board approved in December last year. And we're taking all of the elements of this carbon pie, those outer rim titles that you can see there, and we're building our green plan, which is a 5-year plan, about how we're going to tackle all of those areas. And what we've actually done is we've chunked those up into Well, actually, the NHS chunked those up into these spaces, into these topics, as you can see. And again, I appreciate some of these are quite specific to the health industry, but you'll find the ones that mean something to you. If it's not medicines, it might be manufacturing, for example, or something that's more relevant to your particular industry. And then we broke them back down again. And actually we said, well, we want something a little bit more granular than that. And if we're going to drive this properly, we need to have some visibility in these areas. So we created 13 working groups. I know those of you who are counting those boxes on the right-hand side, you'll see more than 13 boxes. All the green stuff at the bottom, we classed as one working group to talk about everything to do with transport and travel. And we have a senior person in the organization, in some cases board members, that chair these particular groups. And the groups are made up of clinical, non-clinical, engineering, non-engineering people that have a passion for doing something in this space, but also can help facilitate change in those spaces. Now, this is in its infancy. We're still working on this, still not getting it right in some places, and others it's working pretty well. So that's work in progress. And there's some themes that run through all of these. So 3 of them in particular are workforce and system leadership. So that is what's our top-down approach? What's our board saying? What's our trust saying to the world about what we're doing about carbon? And what's our bottom-up approach? How are we helping people on this journey to get there? Again, sustainable models of care, very specific to us in the health industry. But how are we, all of these things that we're looking at, how does that help us? Because care of people is obviously our priority. So how does sustainability fit within that care model? And then digital transformation, so which will probably apply to all of these areas, like are we consulting more at home via video link, but can everybody access that kind of technology? So how does digital transformation help us move, excuse me, in that direction? We have action trackers for each one of those groups. So we don't have minutes of meetings, and it's not just a meeting for meeting's sake. It's actually looking at proper actions and saying when we're going to complete those by. The difficulty, of course, is understanding the data behind that. How are we actually going to measure all of those areas? And some of them aren't particularly easy as others. We made sure that our intranet and our website had all of this information. So actually quite a lot of these slides and some of the information you've seen today sits on our intranet and our website, and there's plenty of places where people can go. If they can't come to talk to us as a sustainability team, because we're a small number of people, they can find information on the net somewhere. Excuse me. We're also making sure we invest in the right tools to track data, and we're also making sure that we research, because there's people have done this stuff elsewhere and we need to learn from them. People have already implemented some of these changes in other areas of public and private sector, and rather than us trying to reinvent the wheel, let's just learn from what they've done and implement it in our own business if that fits well. So specifically, what have we done in some of these areas? Well, in our sort of supply chain side and the travel side, we've invested in, we're trying to take people out of cars and ideally put them into a healthy way of traveling, so walking or cycling, or maybe public transport. We've invested quite a lot in bike shelters and lockers and showers for people if they're biking into work. We also have a bike hire scheme. No charge to employees. They can hire a bike for a week just to see how they get on, and we have a variety of bikes, including e-bikes they can hire. We've invested in a piece of software called Warp It, which is around, it's a reuse software, so it's a bit we obviously got a lot of people and a lot of space, and occasionally we have pieces of equipment that we throw away that we shouldn't throw away, so like tables and chairs and filing cabinets, that kind of stuff. So we can find a new home for them by using this piece of software within our organization. It prevents us buying new ones, and it also prevents us from sending any of those for incineration. It extends wider than that. So all of the Birmingham University, for example, I think is part of that software platform. So we can also find things that they're getting rid of, and they can take things from us if we're getting rid of things as well. And then we're also investing in a piece of software that tries to really get into the granular part of the supply chain to see where the carbon sits within all of our suppliers. And I'm going to talk a bit about suppliers later, because that might be something that's more of interest to some of you on the call. In terms of our first target, this green wedge here, the typical things, we've done quite a lot of LED lighting already. We've spent another $500,000 at the end of last year trying to put everything now to LED lighting, but also making sure we're clever with that. So lighting areas that do need lighting and putting some sensors in areas that don't need lighting all the time. We've spent quite a bit of money on AMR, which is automatic meter reading. So that's putting automated technologies or technologies onto meters to collect that data automatically, so we don't have to send people out to read meters all the time. Data is key for managing energy, as I'm sure you're familiar with. So for us, we want to make sure that we've got good quality data. We're not relying on people to go and take those meter readings. And we've also spent some money on an IGA, that's an investment grade audit. So it's a much more detailed energy audit. We want to really get down to the bottom of where we can really start scraping the savings out. So this hasn't been completed yet. It's work in progress, and that'll be completed in the next couple of months. And we've engaged a contractor to help us do that. Almost finally, I want to quickly talk about the PSDS scheme. So this is, appreciate it's something that is just for public sector. It sits in this part of our carbon pie, well, more specifically in this part, actually, it sits here. It's a £58 million project over 3 years, of which £53 million of that we secured through government funding. It's the largest amount of government funding in the UK, and the only 3-year project, so it's got quite a lot of eyes on it. And it's going to reduce our carbon by around 10,000 tonnes. So it's a good chunk of our building energy pie. What does that mean? Well, currently, this is our women's hospital, mostly a maternity hospital. We're going to remove our gas-fired heating system. It's a combined heat and power CHP unit. And we're going to put in ground source heat pumps. Drilling started on that, starts on that next week, actually. We connect that into our existing infrastructure. And because of the way heat pumps work, which I'm not going to go into the detail of now due to time, and also because our children's hospital, our women's hospital, is effectively a multi-story caravan. The walls and glazing are very, very thin, which makes it like one of these in the summer and makes you feel like this in the winter. We're going to completely re-insulate and reglaze and reclad the whole of the hospital. It's a 1960s, 1970s build, terrible, and doesn't retain heat and cooling in there at all. We're also going to throw in some energy efficiency measures. Some of that will come out of our investment grade audit. Some of it's already locked in, and much better control over the spaces that we have. Similar story at the children's, remove our gas-fired CHP, put ground source heat pumps in, reconnect that up to the existing network. We can't do quite a lot of the children's hospital. You'll see a lot of that is grade 2 listed Victorian building, so it's difficult to do anything with that. But we can do our emergency department, which is the building highlighted in red there. Again, more energy efficiency, more control, and also replacement of our very inefficient main entrance, which the doors are open all the time. It's freezing in the winter, and the lighting and the heating is on all the way through the year, which is terrible. And a final thought, and I appreciate a lot of that is health specific, but actually for those of you that might be supplying to the NHS, or not actually, but this is basically the NHS have said that they're not going to buy off any supplier that doesn't meet or exceed our net zero carbon targets after 2030, which, is a little time away, but not too far. And I wonder if this then sets the precedent for other organizations in their supply chain, where they will say, look, you'll only supply us with goods and services if you're meeting the same targets that we have. And I think that's, if you're there first, you'll pick up lion's share of the market, and it's good for the planet too. So just something to bear in mind. And I think that's me finished. Thank you for listening.
Fantastic. Thank you ever so much, Dan. I have noted down several questions, which I'll save for the end. But please, just to encourage the audience, if you have questions for Dan, please do put them in the Q&A in the chat, and we'll come to those during the Q&A session. I'll now hand over to Laura from GridEdge, who'll be talking about the innovative service that they provide to businesses to help them lower their carbon footprints and the work they've done to lower their own carbon footprint.
Thanks, Emily. Morning, everyone. My name's Laura, and I'm the Business Development and Customer Success Manager for a company called GridEdge. So we use AI and machine learning to help commercial buildings lower their carbon footprint. And GridEdge is a Birmingham-based company. We're a spin out from Aston University, and we've been going for around 5-ish years now. And we're backed by some companies such as BP Ventures, Noe Group and Centrica. And we're currently working on some really exciting investment and partnership opportunities with some big FM and tech companies that hopefully I'll be able to talk a little bit more about soon. And everyone at GridEdge is incredibly passionate about sustainability and helping to mitigate climate change. And my role primarily focuses around helping our clients to make cost and carbon savings in the built environment. And it's really great being able to tie my personal passions into what I do at work. So before I talk to you about GridEdge, I'd like to talk about some of the sustainability things we do as a smaller company. So we're working in partnership with this great company called Play It Green, who help us to offset our emissions and to reduce our carbon footprints. Similarly, we work with Pawprint, who help us to find those small, daily, lasting changes that make a positive impact, both on the environment at work and at home. If you don't know about this, Jen, we use Ecosia. Ecosia is a search engine that plants trees every single time you search, and all of our employees use this as a default. I'm really big on trying to practice what we preach. So although we're in tenanted offices in the centre of Birmingham, we've been working with our building operator to try and deploy the GridEdge system in our own building. And we do lots of other small bits and bobs too, which make a difference, such as vegan days and team lunches and using sustainable GridEdge merchandise and materials. So you're all probably wondering, who is GridEdge? And our CEO recently told us to all go and watch a film called Minority Report with a very handsome Tom Cruise, so I didn't mind. And although GridEdge aren't Minority Report, my incredibly talented data science colleagues, unfortunately I can't take credit for any of this, have created a software system that uses AI to predict energy and carbon crimes in commercial buildings, allowing intervention and stopping the wasted energy or gas use ever happening. So what's the reason we're doing all this? With carbon at an all-time high, costs going through the roof, and everyone struggling to reduce their consumption, GridEdge aims to be the AI partner that powers commercial buildings to net zero. And with around 38% of global CO2 emissions coming from commercial buildings, intervention is needed and fast. And of that, around half of the consumption comes from what we call large-scale commercial buildings, which we believe is where GridEdge can have the biggest impact, with thousands and thousands of these across the world. And this challenge is becoming harder and harder. We've got more complex loads and assets being added, such as heat pumps, EVs, and solar. And we often find these assets aren't being monitored alongside the performance of the building. So alongside this, we've got upcoming regulations, such as behind the meter tariffs and network operators handling grid constraints and demand. So to achieve net zero, the world simply has to find a way to decarbonise commercial buildings. The complexity is far too great to allow a human to be able to analyse, predict and make interventions quick enough. And it's only going to become more complex. As we just touched on, we've got more complex sources, loads and regulations. And GridEdge is continually working. We do lots of R&D projects to solve these challenges. And we believe that we have solutions in place that we think can help across the next 10 years or so. So all of this ultimately starts with efficiency. The cheapest and greenest kilowatt hour is the one that we don't have to use. And we work with all of our customers with the aim of working towards flex and interoperability. So the GridEdge solution isn't a crash diet. It helps to change the lifestyle of the building. And I like to call it a Fitbit for commercial buildings. So our digital energy detective helps to identify where the problems might be. And we have a simple net zero journey, which enables our customers to see holistic data from the building. So we look at things like metering, BMS data, EV charging, sensor, weather, occupancy, and asset data, alongside data from the grid, such as peak loads, capacity constraint, pricing, and carbon. And this data allows us to make predictions, so you can make proactive changes and continually optimize your assets and loads whilst reducing future constraints. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about our GridEdge journey. So initially, we work with our customers to identify the biggest wins or the quickest improvements that they can make. So initially, our users can input their postcode or their MPANs into our system to see the full energy consumption and trends of their portfolio, helping to identify where to target first. So which of your buildings have the highest consumption or uses the most carbon? Which is the most expensive to run or has the most out of hours use? Which maybe uses more energy than it did this time a year ago? We often find clients don't have access to this data, so initially just visualising all that for them can be really useful. Next up, we create a 3D representation of our clients' buildings, allowing them to identify where to target and how to make those all-important cost and carbon interventions. So our system makes predictions too. And we found historically that a lot of energy management tends to be looking backwards. So you might get your bill for last month and you might realise that assets were left on, or it was a lot more expensive than you expected it to be. So we're helping our clients to use data to look ahead and live and rather than backwards. And our smart algorithms are always scanning our clients' data, aiming to detect potential inefficiencies in real time. So kind of things we spot initially: out of hours use, where we could trial or implement new schedules to save costs and carbon, or where we've got assets competing. And Grid Edge is a machine learning tool, so it learns all this kind of behaviour. So if we've got a day where it's a little bit chilly in the morning maybe, and you've got the heating on, and then as the sun comes around, everybody's really warm in the afternoon, and you've had to compensate with the cooling, our system learns that kind of behaviour. And when it sees a day with a similar set of characteristics, it will say, hey, you normally do this heating and cooling thing. Shall we hold off a little bit on the heating in the morning, for example? So our system takes into account comfort levels. So what we don't want to do is come in and suggest you switch everything off and you get loads of complaints. It's not sustainable. So we created a comfort indicator, and that's one of the most important parts of Grid Edge. We also take into account things like occupancy level. With commercial buildings, for example, there's lots of, or office buildings, sorry, there's lots of hybrid working going on after COVID. So if we can see that there's no meeting room bookings on that day, or there's nobody on a certain floor, we can help to optimize your strategy accordingly. So we're showing all the data sets that inform the way our clients manage the building and the relationship between them all too. And this part of our roadmap is all about highlighting inefficiencies and finding those all-important quick wins. So we can then move into predictability. So we can schedule changes ahead of time. And our Carbon Advisor tool allows our clients to look at their strategy for tomorrow and see what a 5, 10 or 15% carbon reduction might look like. And it identifies strategy change you'd need to make to get there. So it takes into account temperature and comfort levels, and it shows you the impact this strategy change would have on your buildings. And these changes, they can be made 24 hours in advance to not only avoid energy use, but to make daily reductions. And when you've got net zero or carbon reduction targets, it's a great way to make daily interventions and changes as part of your journey. And last but not least, this is our sweet spot and my favourite part of Grid Edge. And this involves the building and the grid fully synchronised, hence the name Grid Edge. So we're looking at what's happening in the grid and what's happening in the building to fully synchronise those. So an example is we recently did a project with Marubeni that proved that we could use V2G units, solar and buildings to make a profit on a fleet of cars, ensuring that they were always at optimal charge point. So that type of optimization allows us to take all this to that next step and have full control of buildings and loads. So using the Grid Edge system and going on the journey with us has allowed our customers to see savings in excess of around 20% and an ROI in as little as 3 to 6 months of working with us. Just conscious of time, so I won't talk too much about this, but we've got an example in the right-hand corner of Grid Edge in the public sector. So initially, we only looked at the client's AC units, and this was a local authority office building. Just by optimising the AC units, we saw an annualised saving of £21,000. We've also got an example in the arts, and we noticed that our clients' fan cool units were always running just a little bit and using 0.25 kilowatts each. But across their building, they had 400 fan cool units. So just by turning these assets off, the client was able to make a substantial cost and carbon reduction. The last one I'll talk about, which is a building my fellow Brummies will be familiar with, is the Bullring Shopping Centre. So where possible, we love to work with local clients and to help our city to decarbonise. So some of you might be aware the Bullring has big glazed roofs and windows, so they often struggle during the summer. So we help them to optimise their cooling loads, which resulted in a £20,000 saving across one spring and summer period. So thank you all so much for listening. And if you wanted any further information, please do feel free to reach out to me. I was doing a practice run last night and my boyfriend was listening, and he told me he now better understands what I do and he can tell his friends when they ask. So if it was half as useful for you guys as it was for him, that's a big win for me. So thanks again, and looking forward to your questions in a bit.
Fantastic. Thank you ever so much, Laura. I'll now hand over to Kirstin Roberts from Freeths. Kirstin's the director at Freeths, and she'll be talking about waste reduction, greenwashing, and the implications that it has. Over to you, Kirstin.
Hi. Oh my God.
Minor technical issue, I'm assuming. Should be able to switch your video on in the bottom left-hand corner. We can hear you.
You're really panicking. Yes. I'm so sorry, everybody. I was getting ready with my slides, and now all I can see is the questions section. You can probably hear it in my voice that I'm in an absolute pickle. Any tips on how to re-find the video and the slide box?
My colleague Karen might be able to show your slides for you. Yeah.
Okay, if you do that, and I will talk blind, but I'm sure it'll be absolutely fine. So, take a deep breath, everybody. I'm from Freeths. I'm very used to giving webinars, but not very used to giving them on Zoom, so I do apologise. So Freeths is, if you click through to the next slide, please, which shows the team, but I won't talk about us too much. We have a clean energy, waste and sustainability team. Those are the lead people there, but behind us we have about 40 specialists. And we're very clear that we are a clean energy team. So unlike lots of law firms, we don't deal in dirty stuff like coal and oil. It's very much about ground source heat pumps and solar and large grid scale batteries. I specialise in waste, which I've been doing since about 2003. And so I help both waste management companies with their contracts, but also large retailers who want to reuse their waste, reduce their waste, etc. So I'm going to be talking about some of those opportunities today. Can you click through to the next slide, please? So hopefully you'll be looking at what we call the rainbow donut. So these are some of the areas in which Freeths regularly helps its clients. And just before I go on to talking about waste as a resource and sustainability in the supply chain, I want to mention a couple of the others. So you may be thinking, I mean, the NHS presentation from Dan is incredibly impressive, but they're obviously a long way through their journey. And I empathise with that, because at Freeths, we're sort of starting on this journey ourselves. We're an SME ourselves. So what we have done is engage with sustainability consultants who've measured our emissions, which for us is all carbon. And that's your start point. You've got to get your benchmark in. So get the sustainability consultants on board to measure that for you. And we're about to have our second report. So we've had one for the first year, we've got our benchmark, our next report. And that gives you some science-based targets that you can set in terms of what you're going to do about trying to be net zero. You have to get those measurements done about where you're emitting carbon. You know, is it travel? Is it energy usage? So that you can make your plan. And we can help you with that in small ways as well as big ways. So for example, one of the things on the donut, as we call it, if you look at about sort of 10 o'clock, flexibility, if you're a large user of electricity, perhaps you have a lot of freezers in your business, you're a food business, you can enter into a contract, demand side response, agree with National Grid to turn down your energy sometimes, maybe turn those freezers off for 10 minutes, which I'm told doesn't do them any harm, and therefore get a payment for doing that, because you would be doing it at a time when the grid really needs that electricity. So, you know, a cup of tea in the middle of a big soap opera on TV, you know, when they go to the advert breaks, you've agreed to switch your energy usage off for those 10 minutes. There can be payments there. So that's sort of the whole ambit of what Freeths helps its clients with. But if we click through to the next slide, I'm going to talk about some more specific opportunities. So hopefully now you are looking at the sustainability and return on investment. And a strong message I want to give you is, I think a lot of SMEs look at sustainability plans and net zero plans and think, oh my gosh, what's this going to cost me? And particularly at the moment, if never before, we can't afford these costs. So switch it round, look at it as an opportunity and look for returns on investment. So what do I mean by that? So cost savings. So Freeths is a law firm. And if you picture a Dickensian law firm, we pretty much would have looked like that 10 years ago, but we've essentially done away with paper. So everybody does everything by email. We've invested in IT systems where we can save everything, because obviously we need to keep hold of things for a long, long time. We've invested in software that enables our clients to sign documents online rather than in a paper format. So that's great for the planet because we're not using all that paper, we're not cutting down all those trees, but actually it's a massive cost saving for the business. So being more sustainable can save you money as well as, save you money instead of always costing you money. So another example would be turn the lights off. You know, we've got a big campaign on at the moment with our staff to turn their monitors off at the end of the day, in the same way that as at home, people are trying to save electricity by turning TVs, etc. off at the plug, microwaves. We can do that in the office as well. So again, there are cost saving opportunities. Under the increased sales headline, as Dan mentioned, the NHS is saying that it's not going to contract with suppliers who don't meet its targets by the end of this decade, which will be here before we know it. Along the same lines, the central government bodies put out a practice note 2 summers ago to say that any contract they let for goods or services with a value of over 5 million a year, which I appreciate is huge, must have inbuilt within it that in its assessment of which bidder is going to be successful, that bidder has its own net zero plan, and that plan has been challenged. So you can't just tick a box and say, yeah, we've got one of those. You have to be able to prove that you're working towards it. Now you'd think, well, I'm not bidding for contracts over £5 million directly from central government, but I'm already seeing those kind of assessments being included in invitations to tender from councils and local authorities. And again, even if you don't sell directly into the public sector, it may be that your customers do, and they're going to have to flow down those contractual obligations to you. So you will be impacted unless you join the party, essentially. But the flip side of that is, and as Dan said, if you're one of the first that can prove that you've got net zero targets aligned to the NHS or other public bodies or other huge businesses, then you'll get in there first. So that can be an opportunity. Employee recruitment and satisfaction. More and more, the younger generations only want to work for businesses which are sustainable. So to keep your staff and recruit the staff for the future, you're going to have to prove that you're sustainable. Risk reduction, well, that sort of aligns with a lot of these. But the other thing I wanted to mention, you know, as well as if you're not in the increased sales bracket through sustainability, you'll be in the risk of losing sales bracket. But there's also a lot of legislation coming down the pipe. So, for example, we already have the plastic packaging tax. So if you manufacture or import plastic packaging over 10 tons of it per annum, you're paying massive tax on that. You know, a lot of businesses are waking up to this now. HMRC was expecting about 10,000 businesses to have registered for the plastic packaging tax by now, and so far only just under 1,000 have. But yeah, you know, the tax authorities will catch up with you if you're one of those businesses that should have registered. So if you can, the way to avoid that tax is to be using over 30% recycled products within the packaging. So again, there are opportunities to save costs there. And if you fail to do so, then that's a risk for your business. Similarly, we've got something coming down the pipe called extended producer responsibility. The first one's for packaging. And then also I wanted to mention something called TCFD, which is the biggest PLCs at the moment are having to report on not their impact on the environment, but the environment's potential impact on them. So by way of example, I act for lots of waste companies, and it might be that 10 years ago, when the yards into which they take waste flooded once every 3 years, but now because of global warming, they flood every year. And the biggest companies in the UK already have to report on those kinds of issues, and investors can see them. It goes in with their accounts. You know, if the scarcity of ingredients or scarcity of things, you know, we all know that there's a car shortage because of scarcity of supply of certain products. The government has already said that they are going to flow down that reporting obligation to all SMEs. Now, it's going to be within the next few years, and I'm sure that's going to be longer off now. But again, you need to reduce your risk in relation to the climate change impact on your business as well. So next slide, please. So this is the waste hierarchy, which is an inverted triangle. And some of you may be familiar with this, but this is what government uses in, it came through the EU, and this is what our government still uses when assessing legislation that it's going to put in place. So lots of people think, oh, I've got waste, I should try and recycle it. But actually, you should be trying to prevent that waste being waste in the first place. So one of the things that Dan mentioned was using a software tool that if they've got spare desks, can they be used somewhere else? So it's this idea of, I don't need this, but can it be used somewhere else? And of course, going back to this idea of opportunities, if you can sell that to somebody for its existing purpose, you might be able to make some money on it. So instead of throwing it away, can it be an income source? If you can't reuse it as it is, can you prepare it for reuse as something slightly different, or then recycle it? And again, look at what you throw away. Could somebody else either be using it, or next one down the hierarchy, could they be recycling it, taking it apart? So if it's a table with some metal legs, can you take the metal off and sell that? Because there's always some good income to be had from metals. So don't immediately think you should be paying your waste management company to take waste away. That it might be an income stream. It might be an income stream from them. So even if they won't pay you for what they're taking away from you, they might reduce the charge that they charge to you for what they take away from you, because actually they're then selling it and making something off that end. And then lower down, then you're looking at other recovery, which means burning it and turning it into electricity, etc. Next slide, please. So this is a more colourful slide, but one specific to the food and drink world. And again, I suppose I just wanted to mention that there are risks. If you don't start addressing what you're doing with your waste, then you may find that you're being made to address it. So I've mentioned plastic packaging tax, I've mentioned extended producer responsibility in relation to packaging, but in addition, for the food industry, they're currently consulting on large food producers having to report in a very granular way on what food they throw away. And the next step will be certainly to do something about that. You know, it's a carrot and stick approach. If they won't do something about it, they'll be made to do something about it. Maybe there'll be another tax. But actually, at the moment, there's an opportunity, because when those food and drink companies look at what they throw away, it makes them realise just how much they throw away, and actually, could they be doing something else with it? Because 50%, you know, on average, 50% of carbon is emitted during the manufacturing process. So if we can manufacture less in the first place, then we're not having to worry about how to deal with that carbon that we've emitted later on. The next slide, I just wanted to mention something called the Chancery Lane Project, which is a free resource. So if you are at the stage where you are, you know, you've got your sustainability plan and you've got your net zero plan, you can only achieve your net zero targets by flowing those through your supply chain, in the same way that Dan mentioned the NHS is only going to contract with suppliers who are able to meet the NHS's net zero plan. So this is the website address is on there. It's free clauses for you to use in your supply chain contracts. It's a free resource. About 148 different law firms, including Freeths, have given time for free to create these clauses. And they do everything from a clause that you could put in your contracts with your suppliers to say, we need data from you, because you'll need data in order to work out some of your scopes, how much carbon you're emitting in terms of things that you buy, right through to, if you, my supplier, don't meet my carbon net zero target, then I can terminate my contract with you, which is a bit harsh. But there's lots of clauses. I gave two examples there. One is about using more efficient, low emission vehicles. And I'm starting to see that in contracts from the public sector to its bidders. You know, one of the criteria will be if you're using low emission vehicles, or at least on a journey to use them. And the second example I've given there, Alex's clause, is circular economy product design obligation. So when you're buying products or having them manufactured for you, putting clauses in there to oblige your manufacturer to see whether it can be using recycled materials, using less materials, will those products be reusable or recyclable at the end of their life. And the next two slides are just quickly on greenwashing. There's greenwashing, greenwishing, and greenhushing, which amuses me. So greenwashing is where you're making claims about your products in terms of their sustainability that you can't substantiate. Greenwishing is where you're just being a bit aspirational. Greenhushing, interesting, is where you're actually perhaps a market leader in sustainability, but you're not talking about it, and you're being encouraged to show best practice. So what I want to really highlight to you this morning is that there's something called the Green Claims Code that came in last year from the Competition and Markets Authority. That's what the CMA stands for. So we've always had advertising rules associated with making claims about your products that can't be substantiated. But now this Green Claims Code and the CMA will be looking at your labeling, you know, everywhere that you're talking about your products. And if you can't prove that you've complied with these principles, that claims are truthful, that when you're talking about your competitors, comparisons are fair and meaningful, then the next slide, please, the one with sanctions, then the CMA is going to be able to do something about it. It's the first time that the CMA has had teeth. So they're already going after the fashion industry. They've got Asda and Boohoo in their sites. And they are going to be able to fine businesses, it says in the fine print down there, 10% of global turnover for consumer protection breaches, £300,000 to individuals. This is in addition to the Advertising Standards Authority people demanding that you take your advert down. As I say, the CMA guidance, it's called guidance, but you have to comply with it, goes wider. So you're going to be seeing more and more of this, that if you can't show that the claims that you're making about your products and services are true, it might cost you. It's mostly B2C, so business to consumer, but in a more limited way, it does also apply to business contracts. And then finally, because your heads may be about to explode with all this information and all these things you have to do and all these opportunities that you can seize, the BEIS, as it's called, Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, has a net zero team, and they appreciate that there is loads of information out there, but actually SMEs don't know where to find it. And so they're trying to become a one-stop shop for information. They're not there yet, but there's some links there to BEIS sources of information and measurement tools, boiler upgrade schemes. There is a lot out there. Some of the banks, I know HSBC, for example, are offering sustainability linked loans and green loans. So it's worth talking to your bank. There is a lot of help out there and funding out there, which you may find through your chambers of commerce, for example. Just go and grab it. It's amazing how many businesses aren't going and grabbing it. But as the main message I want to leave you with is, look at this as an opportunity. Draft your sustainability plan from a return on investment perspective, and this will make you stronger. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Kirstin. That was fantastic. And particular thanks for getting through it so brilliantly, given all the technical difficulties. I'm so sorry. If I can invite the panelists to join me back on screen, and Kirstin will give you a moment to hopefully work through the technical difficulties. I have a question for the whole panel about change. I think managing change can famously be quite difficult. How do you communicate to staff the strategic thinking behind your action plans once you've got that kind of benchmarking, the strategic thinking behind your action plans and how you're lowering your carbon footprint and bring them along with that journey?
I can kick off with that if just to give Kirstin a breather, maybe.
I'm sorry.
I mean, there's loads of different things you can do. We're actually finding people are actually just quite passionate about it anyway. I mean, I think this morning I've already had 2 or 3 emails from people just saying, can we do some stuff? And we've just got to organise how we do that. We implemented a digital suggestion board, for example. So one of the historic problems with suggestion boards is that, or boxes, is that somebody posts a suggestion in and then never hears about it ever again. It's a digital board, so you can see complete transparency through that. And it actually feeds into those 13 working groups that I talked about. So if there's a specific thing that sits in one of those working groups, they can talk about that. They can also feed back, but it has a vote up feature on it. So if somebody sees something that somebody suggested, you can vote for that. And the more votes it gets, the bubbles up to the top. And actually, as an organization, we can see what's most important to our employees and maybe prioritize things around that. But it's very key to make sure that you're feeding back afterwards to say, this is what we've done. Even if you've done nothing and you've agreed that you're not going to do anything, just make sure that's fed back. I mean, there's lots of things you can do. You've actually absolutely got to have a top-down and a bottom-up approach. Our top-down approach we're still working on. You've got to tell the world and your organization what it is that you're doing, and then bring people on that journey with you. It's not easy, but actually I think you'll find certainly in the last 2 years, most people are generally on the journey now with you. Perhaps let Laura and Kirstin add to that.
Yeah, at Freeths, we've got a green group, which is the staff facing side of ESG and sustainability for us. And we get lots of suggestions. Some of the suggestions are balmy, I would say, like somebody suggested that everybody bring in their waste clothing. We're a law firm, we haven't got anywhere to store it. And also there's waste regulations around it. So, but certainly we take every suggestion. And as Dan said, if we don't do a sort of firm-wide response on something, we definitely contact the people and are encouraging. And what we find is that we've got loads of volunteers. Absolutely, there's so many people who are passionate about this and want to do something. And as a result, we're now collecting the coffee filters from the coffee machines and making the grains available for people to take home to their gardens. You know, that was a little idea that came through from one of the offices, and we thought, why not? So, you know, lots can be done and lots of great ideas will come from the staff.
Yeah, I totally, just to go off the back of what Dan said, I totally agree. I think everybody's really passionate about sustainability and saving our planet. So I think it's just really important, as you said, Emily, to take your employees on that journey with you, show them what you're doing and allow them to have visibility. So some of our clients do is they have Grid Edge on the screen when people walk in, so they can see that their carbon footprint's being tracked and their energy use is being tracked. And sometimes just having that visibility enables staff to act in a way and to change their behaviours in order to help save the planet. So things like that I think are really important, and taking your staff on that journey with you and listening to ideas, etc.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, just one last thing. So, you know, I keep banging on about it can be an opportunity and not just a cost. So we're currently on a campaign. We've been on a campaign for years to try and get people to switch their monitors off because it saves the planet. But now, obviously, Freeths, like everybody else, is trying to reduce its energy consumption. And those two messages aligned are having more of an impact than they ever had before. So again, you know, sustainability and saving money can go hand in hand.
Absolutely, that's a really important point. We've had a couple of questions in the Q&A function here on Zoom. The first one is about supply chain. So someone's asked, there are typical SME who buy most stuff, typically electronics and stationery, from Amazon. Amazon are unable to tell us the carbon footprint of these deliveries, so we're not really able to report on this. Does anyone have any advice on getting environmental data from large suppliers and we can't use our own supplier terms?
Well, I suppose, yes, it's difficult and there isn't one answer. I don't know what you do about Amazon. Another big problem people have is trying to get data out of their landlords. So again, using Freeths as an example, most if not all of our offices across the UK, we're the tenant. So it can be really difficult to get the data that you need. So on that one, I'm afraid I'm empathizing rather than having an answer.
Yeah, I again, don't have a firm answer with that. I can tell you what we do currently. And again, data is so difficult to obtain, as Kirstin is alluding to. What we currently do, and it goes back to some of the things we've talked about in the supply chain already, is that, so for example, all the medical equipment that we buy in our trust, I sit on the approval board for that. And we do something quite basic really, is just contact that company. A lot of companies have information on their websites already. Those that don't, we can contact them and just say, what are your green credentials? What are your what's your net zero carbon target look like? Coming back to this point about, we're not going to contract with anybody for a product or a service after 2030 if they're not on meeting our targets. It doesn't tell us what the product specifically is, and there's some companies that the CO2 analysis, which is the company we're using to try and make sense of that, I think they're mostly just within the health sector. Most organizations probably don't know, even themselves, what their products are from a carbon point of view, but actually getting a company to just have a plan about tackling all of their carbon as an organization is probably enough for us at the moment to say, we'd rather work with this company because they've got a plan and their targets look good, against another company that don't have anything at all and aren't even thinking about it. And that's, I think, all we can do right now until people start getting much more granular information about their own products.
Yeah, I totally agree with Dan. As a small company, we totally sympathise too, but we have our marketing coordinator who's really trying to look into alternatives rather than Amazon. So we're looking into smaller, more sustainable businesses that we can use to supply.
Fantastic. Very, very quickly, as I know we've only got 3 minutes left, but a final question from the chat as well. Does anyone have, or has anyone come across a good tool for planning the steps to get to net zero? So the example given is a template document to hit key milestones. It might be one that we have to create ourselves, but just trying not to invent the wheel. Just going back to, obviously, I know some mentioned in your presentations.
Can I plug in there for the Chancery Lane project, which is one of the slides that I had, or that I think you all saw. The Chancery Lane project's got some great net zero tools, free to use. So if you just Google them, I know that there are some net zero maps, that kind of thing, which you may find of assistance. Fantastic.
Thank you ever so much. I'm very conscious of time, so we'll end there. But if anyone has any further questions, please do get in touch with the Chamber, and we'll kind of pass those on as appropriate. Thank you all so much for attending this webinar on lowering your carbon footprint. We hope you've all learned something, and I'm sure you have, on how you can apply some of the advice given to your organisation. Please don't forget to fill in our post-event survey. My colleague Karen has very kindly put it in the chat just now. It was sent out to you directly shortly after this webinar, and it's used to inform our lobbying activities and to help us design our sustainability activities for the coming year. This webinar, as I mentioned at the start, is part of our Sustainable Business series. In the coming weeks, we'll have a range of webinars and events on topics including developing low carbon products and services, decarbonisation across key sectors, which will be a physical event at Tyseley Energy Park, climate risk and adaptation and role of businesses, and then finally our Sustainable Business Conference on 2nd of November, which will be a fantastic morning. If you can attend, please do. We've got some brilliant speakers lined up, including Mayor of the West Midlands, Andy Street. I'd like to say a huge thank you to our sponsors, Aston University, University of Birmingham and Shakespeare Martineau. And then finally, a huge thank you to our speakers today, Dan, Laura and Kirstin, for sharing your insights. They're hugely appreciated. I'm seeing lots of thank yous in the chat. And thank you for those who attended. I hope it's been useful.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.